Abu Musa said. The Prophet asked for a tumbler containing water and washed both his hands and face in it, and then threw a mouthful of water in the tumbler and said to both of us, Abu Musa and Bilal, drink from the tumbler and pour some of its water on your faces and chests. Narrated by Ibn Shihab. Mahmud bin Arabi, who was the person on whose face the Prophet had ejected a mouthful of water from his family's well while he was a boy, and Urwa, on the authority of Al-Miswar and others, who testified each other, said, whenever the Prophet performed ablution, his companions were nearly fighting for the remains of the water. Narrated by Asaib bin Yazid. My aunt took me to the Prophet, and said, O Allah's Messenger! This son of my sister has got a disease in his legs. So he passed his hands on my head and prayed for Allah's blessings for me, then he performed ablution and I drank from the remaining water. I stood behind him and saw the seal of prophethood between his shoulders, and it was like the zir al-hijla, means the button of a small tent, but some said egg of a partridge, etc. Narrated by Amr bin Yahya. On the authority of his father, Abdullah bin Zayd poured water on his hands from a utensil containing water and washed them, and then with one handful of water he rinsed his mouth and cleaned his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out. He repeated it thrice. He, then, washed his hands and forearms up to the elbows twice and passed wet hands over his head, both forwards and backwards, and washed his feet up to the ankles and said, This is the ablution of Allah's Messenger. Narrated by Amr bin Yahya. My father said, I saw Amr bin Abi Hassan asking Abdullah bin Zayd about the ablution of the Prophet. Abdullah bin Zayd asked for an earthenware pot containing water and performed ablution in front of them. He poured water over his hands and washed them thrice. Then he put his right hand in the pot and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out thrice with 3 handfuls of water. Again he put his hand in the water and washed his face thrice. After that he put his hand in the pot and washed his forearms up to the elbows twice, and then again put his hand in the water and passed wet hands over his head by bringing them to the front and then to the back, and once more he put his hand in the pot and washed his feet up to the ankles. Narrated by Wahib. That he, the Prophet, in narration 191 above, had passed his wet hands on the head once only. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar. During the lifetime of Allah's Messenger, men and women used to perform ablution together. Narrated by Jabir. Allah's Messenger came to visit me while I was sick and unconscious. He performed ablution and sprinkled the remaining water on me, and I became conscious and said, O Allah's Messenger! To whom will my inheritance go, as I have neither ascendants nor descendants? Then the divine verses regarding Farid, inheritance, were revealed. Narrated by Anas. It was the time for prayer, and those whose houses were near got up and went to their people, to perform ablution, and there remained some people, sitting. Then a painted stove pot, miktab, containing water was brought to Allah's Messenger. The pot was small, not broad enough for one to spread one's hand in, yet all the people performed ablution. The sub-narrator said, We asked Anas, how many persons were you? Anas replied, we were 80 or more. It was one of the miracles of Allah's Messenger. Narrated by Abu Musa. Once the Prophet asked for a tumbler containing water. He washed his hands and face in it and also threw a mouthful of water in it. Narrated by Abdullah bin Zayd. Once Allah's Messenger came to us and we brought out water for him in a brass pot. He performed ablution thus, he washed his face thrice, and his forearms to the elbows twice, then passed his wet hands lightly over the head from front to rear and brought them to front again and washed his feet, up to the ankles. Narrated by Aisha. When the ailment of the Prophet became aggravated and his disease became severe, he asked his wives to permit him to be nursed, treated, in my house. So they gave him the permission. Then the Prophet came to my house, with the support of 2 men, and his legs were dragging on the ground, between Abbas and another man. Ubaydullah, the sub-narrator, said, I informed Abdullah bin Abbas of what Aisha said. Ibn Abbas said, Do you know who was the other man? I replied in the negative. Ibn Abbas said, He was Ali bin Abi Talib. Aisha further said, When the Prophet came to my house and his sickness became aggravated, he ordered us to pour 7 skins full of water on him, so that he might give some advice to the people. So he was seated in a miktab, brass tub, belonging to Hafsa, the wife of the Prophet. Then, all of us started pouring water on him from the water skins till he beckoned to us to stop, and that we have done what he wanted us to do. After that he went out to the people. Narrated by Amr bin Yahya. On the authority of his father, my uncle used to perform ablution extravagantly, and once he asked Abdullah bin Zayd to tell him how he had seen the Prophet performing ablution. He asked for an earthenware pot containing water, and poured water from it on his hands and washed them thrice, and then put his hand in the earthenware pot and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out thrice with 1 handful of water. He again put his hand in the water and took a handful of water and washed his face thrice, then washed his hands up to the elbows twice, and took water with his hand, and passed it over his head from front to back and then from back to front, and then washed his feet, up to the ankles, and said, I saw the Prophet performing ablution in that way. Narrated by Thabit. Anas said, the Prophet asked for water, and a tumbler with a broad base and no so deep, containing a small quantity of water, was brought to him, whereby he put his fingers in it. Anas further said, noticed the water springing out from amongst his fingers. Anas added, estimated that the people who performed ablution with it numbered between 70 to 80.